They told him to clear the stage before the real musicians arrived. Then he sat down at the piano. I have judged piano competitions for the better part of 30 years, and I have learned that the loudest people in any arena are rarely the ones worth listening to. But I will admit, even with that knowledge sitting in my chest like an old, familiar stone, I was not prepared for what happened on the night of the Continental Young Artists Final. The venue itself was part of the problem, if I'm honest. The organizing committee had rented out the Belmont Arena, a cavernous, echoing place built for hockey games and concerts, retrofitted for the night with a single grand piano gleaming under a ring of lights at center ice, now covered over with a black stage floor. 10,000 seats, cameras on cranes, a live broadcast feed running to 3 countries. It was, in the words of the festival director, Conrad Ashworth, a chance to give piano the spectacle it deserves. Conrad was not a cruel man by nature, I think, but he was a man who had spent so long around money and prestige that he had stopped seeing the people who made the evening run, the stagehands, the ushers, the man pushing the broom. That man was Walter Deal. I'd noticed him over the 3 days of rehearsals, quiet, methodical, somewhere in his early 40s, always in a gray maintenance jacket with DIEHL stitched crookedly over the pocket, like it had been sewn on by a child. He moved through the arena before each session, wiping down the piano bench, checking the pedals, adjusting the height of the stool with a small Allen key he kept in his pocket. He did it with a care that struck me even then, not the rushed competence of someone clocking through a checklist, but something gentler, almost reverent. I learned later that Walter had a daughter, 11 years old, named Iris. She wasn't a contestant, too young for this tier, but he'd brought her along each day, and she sat in the front row of the empty stands during rehearsals, swinging her legs, watching her father work. On the night of the final, the schedule ran long. 3 contestants had already played strong performances, technically polished, the kind that win competitions and are forgotten by morning. We were on a 15-minute break before the last performer, a prodigy from overseas whose arrival had been delayed. It was during that break that it happened. Walter had come out to do his final check, wipe the keys, adjust the bench, and Iris had wandered down from the stands to sit beside him on the piano stool while he worked, the way she must have done 100 times in empty rehearsal halls. She wasn't touching the keys. She was just sitting there, swinging her feet, waiting for her father to finish. Conrad came striding out from the wings with his earpiece and his clipboard, trailed by 2 assistants, and he saw the 2 of them at the piano with the cameras still rolling for a pre-broadcast segment, and something in him, I want to be charitable and call it stress, though I suspect it was simply thoughtlessness wearing the mask of stress, snapped. "What is this?" he said, loud enough that it carried. "Get them off the stage. We have a * Steinway under broadcast lighting and you've got." He gestured at Walter and Iris with his clipboard, not even bothering to finish the sentence, as if the rest of it were too obvious to need saying. "Clear the stage. Now, the real musicians are about to arrive and I will not have this on camera." A ripple of laughter went through a cluster of sponsors near the front row. Not unkind, exactly, but the easy laughter of people who'd been handed permission to find something funny. Walter stood up immediately, set down his cloth and reached for Iris's hand. He didn't argue. He didn't even look particularly surprised, which troubled me more than if he had. But Iris stayed seated for one more moment, her hand still resting on the closed key cover, and she looked up at her father with an expression I will not forget. Not hurt, exactly. Something closer to disappointment for him. "Dad," she said, quiet enough that I almost didn't hear it over the arena's hum, "can you play it? Just for a second. The one you used to play." Walter went very still. Conrad, halfway through turning back toward the wings, stopped. "Excuse me." "He used to play," Iris said, looking at Conrad now with the directness only children seem able to muster. "He doesn't anymore, but he used to. He was good." I want to tell you that the arena fell silent in that moment, but it didn't. The air conditioning still hummed. Somewhere a door clanged. A sponsor's phone buzzed unanswered in someone's pocket. But the attention of the room shifted, the way a flock of birds will turn all at once on some signal too subtle for a human eye. Conrad looked at Walter, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time in 3 days, and something flickered across his face. Not kindness yet. Curiosity, maybe, or the particular irritation of a man who suspects he's about to be embarrassed and wants to head it off before it happens. "Is that right?" Conrad said, and there was an edge to it now, a challenge dressed as permission. "Well, go on then. We've got a few minutes, show us." It was meant, I think, as a way of putting the matter to rest quickly. Let the janitor sit down, fumble through a few bars of Happy Birthday or some half-remembered scale, and the moment would resolve itself into the small, forgettable embarrassment Conrad clearly expected, and everyone could move on. Walter looked down at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at the piano, the same piano he had been polishing and tuning the height of for 3 days without once, as far as I'd seen, touching a key. He sat down. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask what he should play or apologize in advance for being out of practice, the way most people would. He simply settled onto the bench, adjusted it half an inch with the same Allen key still in his pocket, an old habit, muscle memory finding its mark even now, and rested his hands on the keys. For a moment, nothing. Then he began. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 3 in A-flat major, and I knew it within the first 4 bars, because I have heard that piece played by some of the finest hands in the world, and I have rarely heard it played like this. The opening is deceptively gentle, almost like a question being asked, and Walter asked it with a tenderness that made the enormous, echoing arena feel suddenly, impossibly small, as if 10,000 empty seats had folded down into the size of a living room. His hands were not the soft, manicured hands of a concert pianist. They were a working man's hands, broad and a little stiff, and for the first several bars I thought I could hear that stiffness, a slight hesitation, a reaching for something half forgotten. And then, somewhere around the first turn into the rolling triplets, something in him simply remembered, all at once, the way a language comes back to someone who hasn't spoken it in years, haltingly at first, and then suddenly, fluently, as if it had never left. The piece builds the way a tide comes in, not all at once, but in long, inevitable swells, each one reaching a little further up the shore than the last. Walter played those swells with a control that made my chest tighten. The left hand carried this rich, rolling undercurrent while the right hand sang above it, and when the piece reached its great central climax, that cascade of arpeggios that, played wrong, sounds merely loud, and played right sounds like joy breaking open. The sound filled that 10,000-seat arena as fully and as warmly as it would have filled a small recital hall. I looked around. The sponsors who had been laughing moments ago were not laughing now. One of them, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit, had gone very still, his mouth slightly open. A stagehand near the wings had stopped what she was doing entirely, a coil of cable forgotten in her hands. And Iris sat on the edge of the stage with her knees pulled up to her chest, watching her father with an expression of such quiet, fierce pride that I had to look away for a moment, because it felt like something I shouldn't be witnessing, like overhearing a prayer. Walter brought the piece down through its final passages, that long, falling resolution, the question from the opening finally answered, and let the last chord ring out and fade, his hands lifting slowly from the keys, his head bowed slightly, the way a man might bow his head after finishing something he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For 3 full seconds, the arena made no sound at all. Then someone, I never found out who, began to clap, and within a breath the sound caught and spread and grew, 10,000 empty seats notwithstanding, until the small crowd that had gathered for that broadcast segment was on its feet, and the sound of it rolled around that enormous space and came back doubled, the way applause does in arenas built for crowds far larger than the one that was there. Conrad Ashworth stood frozen near the wings, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. When the applause finally settled, he walked toward the piano slowly, the swagger gone out of him entirely, and he didn't say anything clever, and he didn't try to cover the moment with a joke the way men like him sometimes do. He simply extended his hand to Walter, who stood and took it, looking faintly bewildered by the whole thing, as if he wasn't entirely sure what had just happened either. "I'm sorry," Conrad said, and I could hear that he meant it, not the practiced apology of a man managing optics, but something rawer. "I had no idea." "It's all right," Walter said, and he glanced down at Iris, who had come to stand beside him and slipped her hand into his. "Most people don't ask." I learned the rest of it afterward, the way one does fragments gathered from conversations over the following weeks. Walter had trained at a conservatory in his 20s, on a scholarship, with what his old teachers apparently still called, 20 years later, the most natural hands they'd ever taught. A family illness, money trouble, a series of small bad turns that compound the way they do, and somewhere in there, the piano had simply stopped, the way a stream stops when something falls across it, not violently, just quietly, until one day you look up and realize it's been years. He'd taken the maintenance job at the arena 3 years ago. He'd been tuning and polishing pianos he never touched ever since. The young prodigy arrived a few minutes later and played beautifully, and won the competition, as I believe he deserved to. But I will tell you honestly, and I have sat through 40 years of remarkable performances, that what I will remember from that night, what I still think about, is 4 minutes of Chopin played by a man in a gray maintenance jacket, with an Allen key in his pocket and his daughter watching from the edge of the stage, in an arena that, for those 4 minutes, felt exactly the right size. Conrad offered him a job after that, something to do with the festival's education program, working with young musicians from families who couldn't otherwise afford lessons. I heard Walter accepted, on the condition that he keep his old maintenance keys, just in case anyone needed a piano tuned before he was due back on stage. I thought that was rather like him.